Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is called Discerning What is True, and today is the 26th day of January 2024. I am going to be reading another chapter that is called The Hebrew and Other Creations Fundamentally Explained by Gerald Massey. This is in the book called Gerald Massey's Lectures. We're going to be still not even halfway finished of this particular book. So I want to welcome you. The reason why I'm reading some of these books are for a couple of reasons. My friend named Phil Langdon suggested me to read some works by Gerald Massey and others. And so this was one of the books that I actually have on interlibrary loan that I got, and I have a couple months to read it, and then I have to take it back to the library. But we want to, I don't want to digress here. I just want to get to the reading here. So thank you for being here, and let's get into the work here. The Hebrew and Other Creations Fundamentally Explained. Quote, if you would correct my false view of facts, says Emerson, hold up to me the same facts in the true order of thought. End quote. That is the process attempted in these lectures of mine, and the true order and sequence of the facts can only be ascertained by delving down to the foundations in the physical genesis, can only be stated by means of the evolutionary method, can only be proved by the wisdom of Egypt. I claim that on each line of research, my interpretation is derived from the facts themselves and is not arbitrarily imposed upon them or read into them by my own theoretic speculation. I do but flesh the skeleton of facts. It is not the ancient legends that tells us lies. The men who created them did not deal falsely with us by nature. All the falsity lies in their having been falsified through ignorantly mistaken mythology for divine revelation and allegory for historical truth. Geology was not taught among the mysteries of ancient knowledge, floating fragments of which have drifted down to us in the book of Genesis. The Christian world assumed that it was, or at least some sort of globe making, and therefore it was founded to be entirely opposed to scientific geology. Mythology never did indicate the historical fall of man. I'll say that again. Mythology never did inculcate the historical fall of man. Theologies have ignorantly supposed that it did, and as a result, they were bitterly opposed to the ascent of man, made known by means of evolution. Such doctrines as the fall of man, the failure of God, and all that bankrupt business in the commencement of creation, the consequence genesis of evil and original sin, the depravity of matter, the filthy nature of the flesh have no other basis or beginning than in the perversion of ancient typology and the literalization of mythology. According to Hebrews, Genesis, the first man was born without a mother or a female of any kind. If that be fact, according to Revelation, it cannot be according to nature, but there is nothing gained by calling it revelation, end quote. By doing so, quote, revelation has come to be a name applied to anything which we may not, for the time being, understand. Quote, revelation has come to mean a series of confounding lies warranted by God to be true. By making this a revelation direct from deity, you destroyed the character of the divine intelligence, which did not know the facts, the processes, or order of any other of all of its own works. Or if it did, it must have palmed off a lying version on the medium of communications to the world as a divine revelation made to man. But Adam never denoted a first man who was produced without a mother, nor Eve a first woman formed from an actual rib of Adam. That is but the literalization of symbolically mode of representation, the key to which has been long mislaid. Speaking of the matter found in the Pentateuch, Philo, Philo, the learned Jew, told his countrymen the truth when he said, quote, the literal statement is a fabulous one, and it is in the mythical we shall find the truth, end quote. On the other hand, he asserts the myths found in the Hebrew form, quote, these things are not mere fabulously inventions in which the race of poets and sophists delight, or are types shadowing forth a allegorical truth according to some mystical explanation, not a history. The latest version is the false, and it is in the mythical that we shall find the truth, but only when it is truly interpreted. Mythology is not to be understood by literalization, even though the Christian creed has been founded on that fatal method. It is not to be made real by modern rationalization, though that it is the basis of Unitarianism, nor is it to be utilized by each one furnishing their own system of hermeneutical interpretation. Mythology is an ancient system of knowledge with its own mode of expression, which enshrines the science of the past in what looks to us at times like foolish and unmeaning fables. It is entirely useless to speculate on such a subject or try to read one's own interpretation in the myths with no clue whatever to their primordial meaning. Anybody can make an allegory go on all fours and read some sort of history into a myth. And of course, he that hides can find. If you put your own meaning into what you read, you can discover it there. You may say it is so. Anyone can say, and possibly get a few others to hearken and believe, but no amount of mere assertion will establish the truth by means of a false interpretation of the fable. Some persons will tell us that if the, quote, fall of man, end quote, be not a fact once and for all, better still, it is true forever, because men and women are always failing or falling. Therefore, the allegory is over truth, and in point of fact, a divine revelation. I have heard preachers resolve the Naturio wrestling match between Jacob and the angel into an exquisitely allegory made to run on all fours for very simple people to ride on. An allegory full of light and leading, and lovely in its moral and spiritual significance for sorely tempted men. The night of the struggle is made internal. The angel is transformed into the devil, and we have the wrestle of the soul with the tempter, and a man on his knees all night in prayer. It is the conflict of Christian and Apollogan on humanized and fought out in a bedroom in place of the dark valley of the shadow of death. It is in this wise that such stories are to be saved from absurdity. Orthodoxy is to regain its lost supremacy. And science and religion are to be reconciled forever. But there is no truth in it all. The history was not human at first, and the subjective mode of treatment does but reface it with another sort of falsehood. If we would ascertain what these old stories originally meant, we must go to mythology. In this case, the Hottentots, Hottentots, can enlighten us. They have a myth or a fable of Sudian Gom, Goam, and Gaunab, Gaunab, the twins who personate the presence of light and darkness, the powers of good and evil. These two contend in moral conflict night after night, the good one getting the better of the bad one by degrees and growing stronger with every battle fought. At last, Tizonian Gom grew mighty enough to give his enemy a blow at the back of his ear, which put an end to Ganam. But just as he was aspiring and falling back into his own abyss of darkness, Ganam gave his opponent a blow into the hollow of his leg that made him go limping for life. In consequence, he was called Sudum Gom, end quote. The meaning of which name is wounded knee, end quote. The struggle with that was that of light and darkness in the orb of the moon, or the son of night fighting his way through the valley of the shadow of death in the underworld during the winter when his movement was slower, and he was represented as being lame in one knee or maimed in his lower member. A wounded knee with a knife thrust through it is the Egyptian hieroglyphic sign for being overcome. Hence, although he conquered the powers of darkness, Sum Gom is said to have been wounded in one knee. The myth is found in many lands and is identical with that of Jacob wrestling all night with the powers called an angel, who maimed him in the hollow of his thigh and made him a form of the quote wounded knee, end quote. Also is worse than useless because misleading to begin by applying a modern mystical system of subjective interpretation to the fragments of ancient wisdom found in the Hebrew books of Genesis, after the manner of Swedenborg, Swedenborg. According to him, the account of the creation in Genesis is not a real history, but a narrative written in the style of the ancient churches, signifying spiritual and divine things. The general subject of the first chapter is not the generation, but the new creation. The Genesis becomes the re-Genesis. The perverted mythos is an intentional spiritual allegory. The 6 days are 6 states in the recreation of man. The seventh day represents the celestial man, and he is in the Garden of Eden, and also the most ancient church. Adam's nakedness denotes the purity of the internal man, or the state of innocence of the celestial church. Eve also signifies the church. Cain is the name of those who falsify the doctrine of the most ancient church. The serpent going on its belly denotes the groveling of the sensual principle seeking after corporal things. The flood, or deluge, was a total immersion of mankind in evil and falsehood. Everything in the word relates to the heavenly and spiritual and is falsified, is transferred to a lower level. But spiritual significance are not primary. The natural or physical must come first because they were first. The eschatological is last. Man was no more remade than he was made on the 6th day. Swedenborg knows or acknowledges nothing of the origins in natural phenomenon, nothing of the true mythical mode of representation, nothing of the astronomical basis for the Garden of Eden, the tree of knowledge, the serpent, or the primitive pair, whose figures are portrayed and whose story can still be read as it was first written in the stars of heaven. The imagery and types of mythology can, of course, be used as a mode of expression for later ideas and for moral or spiritual significance, just as we continue to say the moon rises or the sun sets after we know better. But from the mundane quote standpoint, the natural, the physical, the external alone were primal. Hence, primal mythology is no more moral or immoral than it is obscure, senseless, or insane simply because the phenomena were not human. Before the Egyptian hieroglyphics were understood, Swedenborg understood to vouch for the fact that they represented spiritual ideas by means of natural objects, according to his own doctrine of correspondence, which is no more true than his interpretations of the Hebrew Genesis. This can be proved. The hieroglyphics began as a direct object pictures, which become symbolic in a later phase. The three water signs of the zodiac do not represent a spiritual experience in the Vale of Tears, end quote, but the 3 months inundation, which is annual in the valley of the Nile. The fact is that we cannot translate the thought of primitive or prehistoric man without first learning the language in which was expressed. The wisdom or gnosis, so carefully hidden and jealously guarded in the past, is not to be recovered with any certitude by clairvoyance, insight, or intuitional memory. Whosoever sets up the claim, you may have the vision to see the hidden treasure lying buried in the bottom of the ocean, but you will not be able to bring it back to men by merely dredging for it in your dreams. There were Illuminati in the mysteries of old, but they did not trust to the international faculty for that information, which took them 7 or 10 years to acquire. They were no more self-illuminate. They knew that intuition could not take the place of research and were careful to communicate all the exact knowledge they possessed to those whom they instructed. Quote, add to your faith knowledge, end quote, is the counsel of Paul. In vain we read our own thought into the primitive types of expression and then say the ancients meant this. Subtitalized interpretation will not read the riddle to the root, nor does such things originate in riddles or intentional enigmas. You may believe me when I affirm, and you can prove it for yourself, that mythology was a primitive method of teaching natural facts and not an esoteric mode of misinterpreting them. What we need to know is the primary meaning of the myth makers, and this can only be recovered by collecting and comparing all the extant versions of the original mythos. There is no beginning with the mystical or metaphysical in the past before we have mastered the mythical. That can only lead to a maze or to being lost in a mist of mystification as soon as we are out of the wood of literalization. Cardinal Baronius has said that the intention of Holy Scripture is to teach us how to go to heaven and not how the heavens go. But the earliest scriptures did teach how the heavens go, and it became sacred because it was celestial. The first creation of heaven and earth was but the division into upper and lower by whatsoever means expressed, answering to the discretion of light from darkness. This was also rendered by the dividing of an egg or a calabash, and by the cutting of the heaven, the cow of heaven, or the heifer of the morning and evening star in two. It was neither earth-making nor heaven-making in any cosmic sense, nothing more than distinguishing the light from the darkness, the vault above from the void below. This is illustrated by the creation legend found on the Assyrian tablets, which commences, quote, at that time the heavens above had not announced, nor the earth beneath recorded a name, end quote. The word first uttered in heaven related to times and seasons, and the earliest word was uttered by the appointed timekeepers. The account of creation given in the 2nd chapter of Genesis is that, quote, these are the generations of the heaven and the earth when they were created. And the generations of the heavens were astronomical. We learn from the cuneiform legends of creation how in the beginning God created the heavens. Quote, Bel prepared the 7 mansions of the gods. He fixed the stars, even the twin stars, to correspond to them. He ordained the year, appointed the signs of the zodiac over it. He illuminated the moon, God, that he might watch over the night, end quote. Sayer, that is, this version, however, is comparatively late because the fatherhood had then been founded, in brackets. Then, as Hermes says in the Divine Pomander, the heavens was seen in 7 circles, and the gods were visible in the stars with all their signs, and the stars were numbered with the gods in them, the gods being 7 in number. When the old Genetrix, Genetrix, is excluded, that is from the first, our theology, based on the Old Testament records, has never been anything else than a dead branch of the ancient mythology. And just when all men free to think were finding out this fact, Mr. Gladstone came forward and made another effort to rehabilitate the old book, so generally discredited, and chivalrously led one more forlorn hope for a cause that is hopelessly lost. Surely no Christian martyr of earlier time could have made a more pathetic or pitiful appeal to human sympathies than this man of intellect, who is so much larger than his creed, holding on to his pious opinion in the face of facts most fatal to his faith. For with the literal interpretation of the book of Genesis, the fallen man remains a historical transaction, and the ascent made known by evolution is a suspendous delusion. It is sad sight to see a man like Mr. Gladstone, who, by his position and power, can attract a world attention to his words, cheerfully content to become a leader in misleading, still fondly believing that the creations in the book of Genesis contain a veritable history that could not have been written unless it had been divinely inspired, still trying to make out that it is in accordance with geology and the scientific interpretation of nature. In his case, the child is not only father to the man, but a terrible tyrant over him as well. Mr. Gladstone still maintains the opinion that the man who wrote the account of the creation in Genesis was gifted with fabulous passing all human experience, or else his knowledge was divine. End quote. The order of development presented, he says, is first the water population, second, the air population, third, the land population of animals, and fourth, the land population consummated in man. And Mr. Gladstone says this same fourfold order is understood to have been so affirmed in our time by natural science that it may be taken as a demonstrated conclusion and established fact. The reply of science is point blank denial. It admits nothing of this kind. It knows better. This is not the order in which the various populations make their first appearance on the globe, and it was only by classing these populations according to the notion of distinct creation, which were produced at the rate of one a day or so, that any such definition or distinction could ever have been made. Whatsoever the order of succession, that succession was gradual, with a good deal of parallelism and lapping over on various lines of development. In short, the count is not geological. It's not time. It's not true. When judged by the Earth's record itself, besides, when the ancients placed water before Earth in their series of elements, they have no particular thought whether water or Earth was first in existence. They were only concerned with water being their first recognized necessity, and essential element of life. And if we were teaching our children without any pretense of revelation or assumption of divine knowledge, if we limited ourselves to the natural facts, we should have to point out that the water population as a whole did not exist before that there was any land population. There was no such thing as a completion of creation number one before the beginning of creation number two. No such thing as creation in that sense at all, neither as the act of one day nor of a million years. We know that many forms of life on land precede various forms which are found in the waters, and that life was proceeding on a special line of variation in several elements at once. Moreover, though, man is the crowning outcome of the animal world. It is not necessary to assume any sudden or complete ending to the animal creation before he could appear, as if all lines of descent had to converge and culminate in him. It is very likely that man was earlier than the horse, and almost certain that he was before the dog, as we know that man has probably put in an appearance as head of his time before various other species had reached their last term of their series. It is certain there never were 4 or 3 definite or successive periods of time, and no other in which 3 or 4 distinct populations could have originated. That which is wrong as scientific matter of fact cannot be made right as trustworthy matter of faith, not even by this specialist dialectic of Mr. Gladstone or any other non-evolutionist. Nor is there any loophole of escape in supposing that the day and night of each creation were not intended by the compiler of Genesis to mean a day and a night of 24 hours. We are not allowed to wiggle out of that conclusion. The 6 days might have meant vastly indefinite periods. That is, after we had heard of the geological series of sequence. But for that fatal 7th day, which completes the week of 7 days, the reason why we keep the Sabbath every 7th day is because this was the day of rest for the Lord after his 6 days hard labor. End quote. And God blessed the 7th day and hallowed it because that is his rested. End quote. That was the accepted origin of keeping holy the 7th day every week, and not at the end of aeons of time or 6 ages. The plain meaning of the compiler is not to be evaded or got away from. The writer of the Hebrew Genesis says positively that all things were made and finished in 1 week, and for that reason we celebrate the Sabbath day. 7 days in 1 week are also shown by the dedication of each day to one of the 7 planetary gods. And 7 days in 1 week cannot be geologically periods any more than they can apply to subjective experience of the soul. Mr. Gladstone says the question is, quote, whether natural science is the patient exercise of its high calling to examine facts finds that the works of God cry out against what we have fondly believed to be his work and tell another tale, end quote. The answer is they do cry out and give the lie to that authority or foolishness supposed to be divine. The Word of God says that the act of Adam brought death into the world. The older record shows, leaf after leaf, or stratum beneath stratum, that death had been at work tens of millions of years before man appeared on the earth. In all these orthodox attempts to rationalize mythology, writers and preachers are dealing with matters which they have not yet understood, and which never can be understood on their plane of thought or within their narrow limits. In Aesop's fable, the wolf overhears the nurse threaten to throw the child to him, and he believes her, but after long waiting for the fulfillment of prophecy to bring him his supper, he finds that she did not mean what she said. So is it with the myths. They never meant what they said when literally interpreted, and the literalization of mythology is the fountainhead of all our false belief, mystification being the secondary source. From my point of view, this is merely slaying the slain over again. And yet this literalization of mythology is continued to be taught as God's truth to the men and women of the future in their ignorant and confining childhood. And some 8 or 10 million of pounds are annually flinched from our national revenues for the benefit of a church and clergy established and legally empowered to make the people believe that these falsified fables are a true divine revelation, received direct from God, and if they doubt and deny it, they will be doomed to suffer atrocities, tortures through all eternity. Mr. Gladstone says he is persuaded that the belief of Christians and Jews concerning the inspiration of the book is impregnable. He believes the Genesis to be a revelation for the Christians made by God to the Jews, such as presents to the rejecter of that belief a problem which demands solution at his hands, and which he has not been able to solve. For himself, Mr. Gladstone is so simple and profound a believer in revelation, if, if biblical, and in the inspiration of the Mosaic writer in particular, that he is lost in astonishment at the phenomenon it presents to him. He asks, how can these things be and not overcome us with wonder? How came they to be? Quote, not among Aladdin's or Assyrians or Egyptians who monopolize the stories of human knowledge when this wonderful tradition was born, but among the obscure records of a people who, dwelling in Palestine for 1,200 years from their sojourns to the valley of the Nile, hardly had force to stamp even so much as a name on the history of the world at large, and only then began to be admitted to the general communion of mankind when their scriptures assumed the dress which a Gentile tongue was needed to supply. It is more rational, I contend, to say that these astonishing antitheses were a God-given supply than to think that the race should have entirely transcended in kind, even more than in degree, all known exercise of human faculties, end quote. The answer is that it does not do to begin with wonder in matters which demand inquiry and research. The answer is that the matter of the creations did not originate with the Jewish race at all. Mr. Gladstone's assumption is the sheerest fallacy. The wonderful tradition was not born among them. It was wholly, Wholly, and far more perfectly pre-extant among the Persians, the Aladdins, and the Egyptians. The book of Genesis is assigned to a man who was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. I cannot answer for that man, but I can for some of the matter. To begin with, the legend of Eden is one of those primal traditions that must have been the common property of the undivided human race, carried out into all lands as they disperse in various directions from one center, which I hold to have been African. As Sharp, an earlier English Egyptologist and a translator of the Hebrew scriptures, asserts correctly, quote, the whole history of the fall of man is of Egyptian origin. The temptation of the woman by the serpent and of man by the woman, the sacred tree of knowledge. The cherubims guarding with flaming swords the door of the garden. The warfare declared between the woman and the serpent may all be seen upon the Egyptian sculptural monuments. End quote. The French Egyptologist M. Lefebvre, who has lately identified Adam with the Egyptian atom, Atum, as I had done 7 years earlier in the book of Beginnings, refers to a scene on the coffin of Penpid, that's Penpii, in the Lore, which is similar to the history of Adam in the terrestrial paradise, where a naked and effeminate personage called the Lord of Food, end quote, Nabtafut, is standing before a serpent with 2 legs and 2 arms, and the reptile is offering him a red fruit, or at least a little round object painted red. The same scene is again found in the tomb of Ramses VI, and on the statue, relatively recent in the Museum of Turin, it is the atom, Atum equals Adam, Adam, that the serpent as tempter is offering the round object or fruit of the tree. The same writer says, quote, the tree of life and knowledge was well known in Egypt, end quote. And, quote, whether the scene of Nabtafur can be identified with the history of Adam or not, we can see that the greater number of the peculiar features of this history existed in Egypt. The tree of life and knowledge, the serpent of paradise, Eve thinking of appropriating divinity to herself, and in short, Adam himself, are all these, end quote. This is from a translation from S. BIB, I guess it's Biblical Archaeology, Volume 9, Part 1, page 180. These and other matters pertaining to the astronomical allegory and the natural genesis of mythology were pre-extant in Egypt and have been carried out over the world untold ages before a Palestinian Jew had ever trotted the earth. And yet, incredibly as it may seem or sound, Mr. Gladstone has the reckless confidence to declare that the Hebrew account of creation has no Egyptian marks upon it. That would indeed be strange if it had been written by a man who was a master of the wisdom of Egypt. Mr. Gladstone may have been misled by the Hebrew lecturer. Mr. Rendall, who has said in page 243, it may be confidently asserted that neither the Hebrews nor the Greeks learned any of their ideas from Egypt, end quote. A statement which reveals a cognitive deficiency of the comparative faculty. The same may be said of Professor Sayre, Sayca, when he asserts the, quote, the theology and the astronomical of Egypt and Babylon show no vestiges of a common source, end quote. The creation of the woman from the man in the second chapter of Genesis is likewise found in the magical texts, where it's said of the seven spirits, quote, they bring forth the woman from the lines of the man, end quote. That's from Sayre, Sayce, from HIB-Lecture 395. This also has an Egyptian mark upon it. Such a creation alluded to in the Book of the Dead, where the speaker says, quote, I know the mystery of the woman who was made from the man, end quote. Professor Sayre also asserts that there is, quote, no trace in the book of Genesis, end quote, of the great struggle between the God of light and the dragon of darkness, who is one form or Merodot and Tiamat, Tiamat. The conflict is there, however, but from the original Egyptian source, it is represented as the enmity between the woman and the serpent, and also between her seed and the serpent. The Roman Church renders the passage, that is Genesis chapter 3, verses 15, addressed to the serpent, quote, she shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise her heel, end quote. Both versions are Egyptian. Horus is the son and seed of Isis. Sometimes he is portrayed as bruiser of the Apat serpent's head, APAP. At others, it is she who conquers. Both are combined in the imagery which the Egyptians set in the plains of Fear, where Isis, in the shape of a Virgo, bears the seed in her hands and bruises the serpent's head beneath her feet. This seed is one form, was sown in Egypt immediately after inundation, and in this way, in brackets, as I have shown, the zodiacal representation reflects the seasons of Egypt all around the year. The serpent itself in the Hebrew Genesis is neither an original nor a true type. Two opposing characters have been fused and confused to it for the sake of a false moral. Serpent and dragon were primarily identical as emblems of evil and physical phenomenon. Each was the representatives of darkness, and as such the deluder of men. Afterwards, the serpent was made a type of time, or of renewal, and therefore of life. The dragon, crocodile, a zootype of intelligence. Both crocodile and serpent were combined in Sevek Ra. That's Sevekh, Ra. Both were combined in the polar dragon in the book of Revelation. The dragon remains that old serpent, considered to be the deluder of mankind. Both were combined in the Chumius serpent dragon of the Gnostics, which was survival of Canep as the Agato demon or good serpent of Egypt. The Akkadian type as Ea is the good serpent, the serpent of life, the god of wisdom. Now it was the serpent of wisdom that first offered the fruit of the tree of knowledge for the enlightenment of mankind. Whether this be Egyptian, Akkadian, or Gnostic, it is the good serpent. And as guardian of the tree set in heaven, it was the good serpent, or intellectual dragon, as keeper of the treasures of astro knowledge. It was the latter theology, Persian and Hebrew, that gave the character of the evil one to the serpent of wisdom, who protected the tree, which had been supplemented by the theology of the vitriol throwers who have scarified and blasted the face of nature on earth, and defiled and degraded the starry intelligence in heaven. Professor Sarah's statements are no more correct than Mr. Renault, and Mr. Renault is no more true than Mr. Gladstone. Further evidence may be found in my, quote, natural genesis, but no non-evolutionist can understand or interpret the past. He is too ready to accept the re-beginning, where there can be at most a new point of departure. Mr. Gladstone has been too much wrapped up in the one book. He does not know that the story of Genesis is to be found written in the Bible above, and then the happy garden, the primal pair, the war of the serpent, and the first mother, together with the tree of knowledge. All are constellated in the stars of heaven, according to Egyptian mythology, and are all verifiable on the monuments. When he does learn that such is the fact, he cannot claim that the history inscribed upon the starry walls was written by the Jews or copied from the Hebrew record. But let us see whether we cannot discover a few more Egyptian marks on the Genesis. A paradise or garden that is watered without rain by a mist that went up from the earth to fall upon it to refreshing dew is certainly suggestive of Egyptian origin, as that was the one way in which Egypt was watered from above. This was not so in the Eden at the head of the Persian Gulf, besides which the 8 primary powers or gods of Egypt were the dwellers in Eden or Amsaman, end quote, the paradise of the light, who comprised the Gentrix and her 7 children. The original Genesis and all the chief types are identifiable Egyptian to begin with, but the Hebrew version was more directly derived from the Persian, as the evil serpent proves. Water was the first element of life recognized by the primitive perception. Water was considered to be the mother, or eternal source, personified. In Egypt, the mother of life pours out the water of life from the tree of life. She is the first form of the celestial waterer. In the mystical sense, blood is the water of life, and therefore the mother of life. This beginning on earth with and from the water was Egyptian, Babylonian, Mexican, Indian, Chinese, Greek, British, and universal. It said upon a Syrian tablet that the, quote, the heavens were made from the waters, end quote. So in the Egyptian beginning, the sky was looked upon as the celestial water. This water was also intensified in the river Nile, which was called the, quote, way of the gods, end quote, when the nature powers had been divinized. In that sense, as it were, heaven descended to be continued on earth. From this water of heaven, the land in Egypt was visibly deposited, and the earth was, quote, compacted out of water and by means of water, end quote. When these were discredited, there was the dry land. Here, if anywhere, in the primary hint of a cosmic beginning with a fact in nature, but not with a theory of nature, was a system of geology. The second element of life was breath, emanate or air. In Egyptian, breath or spirit is Nef, N-E-F, and this was personated by Kep, Nef, a form of the first god, who is said to be the breath of souls of those who are in the firmament. Nef, or breath and spirit, explains the Hebrew nefesh, or soul, as the breath of life. Nef, The breathing life in the firmament is also the sailor on the water. In the Hebrew version, Neph becomes the spirit moving on the face of the waters. In the Egyptian representation, he sails the waters in his ark, just as Ea does in the Akkadian version of the myth. The god Neph is also the spirit that presides over the Ba, B-A-U, which had become the pit hole, or the tomb from the womb of the beginning. Egyptian Ba is the Hebrew Bahu, or the void. In both, it is a place left unpersonified. In the latter phase of personification, this Ba, B-A-U, of birth becomes the Phoenician Baal, B-A-E-B, called the consort of Kolpit, K-O-L-P-I-A, the wind or spirit. The Baal was also personified in the Babylonian goddess Bahu. The Phoenician Ba points back to the Egyptian Ba, or Bev, or the hole, cave, well, source, or altres, the original of all the Babs in latter language, including Babylon. Now that which is performed by the Elohim, Yogros, in Genesis is done by the Ali, A-L-I, Allah, or 7 companions in Egypt, most of whom can be recognized individually in relation to the 7 elements as the Hebrew Elohim, that may be dislimited and lose their lightness, but they are the same 7 powers of eternal nature, in brackets, as explained by the Gnosis or Kabbalist, in bracket. In one of the Egyptian creation legends shown by a monument, which was restored in the time of Shabaka, it is said of the Creator, quote, a blessing was pronounced upon all things in the day when he bid them exist and before he had yet caused gods to be made for Plah, P-T-A-H. This appears to me has left another Egyptian mark on the first chapter of Genesis in the refrain. Quote, and the Elohim saw that it was good, end quote, which is uttered 7 times over in accordance with the 7-fold nature of Elohim. And the blessing is pronounced, quote, and God blessed them, end quote, and quote, and God blessed the 7th day, end quote. It would be going too far afield to show all the Egyptian rank marks, such to say, in one lecture, but I must offer another example. The Hebrew word employed for creating when the Elohim from the heaven and the earth is bara, B-A-R-A, bara, end quote. The essential meaning of the word is to give a manifestation and form to material previously without shape. Nothing could so perfectly realize it as the potter at work on his clay, and the Egyptian image of a creator as the former, or Kep, who as the beetle formed his little globe with his hands, and who as the Kepah is the potter sitting at his wheel and shaping the egg of the sun and moon, or the vase of matter to continue life. He who was the former or creator in his name of Lathe, FB, quote, the potter in Hebrew and Phoenician is Jazer, J-A-T-Z-E-R, and this word is also applied to the Hebrew God as creator. Jazerite being Jah, the potter. Thus, the Kabbalist's book of creation, named the Sefer Jazerah, is the book of creation as the workmanship of the former or potter. Anyone who knows anything of the monuments will have recognized another Egyptian mark, I may say the Egyptian potter mark, on the Hebrew creations. The creation, or former, as kept Pa, the potter, is the head of the 7 Knepsmu. I'll just spell it to you. K-N-E-M-M-U, who are his assistants in the work of creation. He is the chief of the Ale, or Elohim, as the fashioner and builder of the heavens. He is also the father of the Egyptian Adam, or Atom, the red one, just as the Hebrews or Phoenician Elohim are the creations or creators of Adam the red. Jehovah Elohim, the Lord God of the second chapter of Genesis, can be further identified with Pa, the founder of the earth and former of men. Pa is the father of Atom, equals Adam, ADM, the father of human beings. He is designated the father of the fathers as equivalent to the title of Dabado, as Ialdabao, chief of the seven Gnostics, Elohim. The name applied signifies the opener from hu to open, and the Hebrew name XYXTP shows that Jah is Puha, equals Pudha, or plot, as the opener. In brackets is the FUERST at page 1166. These we may claim for other Egyptian marks, but I have now learned that the account of the creation in Genesis is not so directly derived from Egyptian as I had once thought. That is, it was rewritten after the time of the captivity in Babylon and the consequent acquaintance with the creation legend in their latest Persian form. This can be shown by a comparison with Parsi Bundahish, or Aboriginal creation, more literally the creation of the beginning. Indeed, we may suspect that the first words of the Hebrew Genesis have to do with the title of Brandahish. They are Bereshis Elohim Bariah and B. Rashalo, in quotes. When literally translated, reads, quote, in the beginning of, end quote, leaving a ellipse without stating in the beginning of what. Now, the meaning of the word Bundahish is the creation of the beginning. This far more perfect statement seems to have been bungled and adapted it for the Hebrew version. The first two facts distinguish in external phenomenon by man were those of darkness and light. The panoramic of mythology representation is drawn out from these as its opening scene, and the long possession of the power of nature, which becomes divinities at a later stage, starts upon its march through heaven above to cast its shadows on the earth below. By observing the alternations of light and darkness, a primary measure of time was first established in the creation of night and day, marked by the twin star, and quote, there was evening and there was morning one day, end quote. As a result of this earliest creation of the beginning, in his Persian Bunda Bish, the deity Ahu Mazda is the chief of the seven Amchapaspans, just as the creator Pa is of the seven Krempermoves, and the Gnostic Anabo of the seven Elohim. Here we learn that the God created the world in 6 periods, although not in 6 days. The first of the Ahura Mazda, creator of the world, was the sky, and his good thought by good procedure produced the light of the world. This is identical with the Elohim seeing the light that it was good, and with the blessing pronounced on his creation by the Egyptian deity. The light, now separated and distinguished from darkness in the creation of time, is quite distinct from the divine, the abstract, or the illimited, and eternal light already existing with Ahura Mazda. It is the evening and morning one day. Darkness and light are personified and represented as being a ceaseless intimacy with each other in the confusion of chaos, but they came to be understood as co-creators and made a covenant in appointing this primordial period of time. And such was the first creation of the Persian series of 6. Quote, and the Ahura creation of the world, end quote, is said, quote, the first was the sky, the second was water, the third was earth, the fourth plants, the fifth animals, the sixth mankind, end quote. The creation of light in the Hebrew Genesis is the creation of the sky in the Persian. And the creation of water in the Persian Genesis becomes the dividing of the waters in the Hebrew version. The time of this creation is called the second day. The third Persian creation is that of earth, which is the dry land of the Hebrews. And the Elohim called the dry land earth, end quote. The fourth Persian creation, or rather creation, is that of plants. This is not a separate creation in the Hebrew version. It is thrown into the third creation, that of earth itself. Nevertheless, the third must have included the plants because it includes every herb yielding seed and every tree that bears edible fruit. And yes, in chapter 2, verses 5, when the creation are all completed and the Elohim had finished the work which they had made, we're told that no, quote, no plant of the field was yet in the earth, and no herb of the field had yet sprung up, end quote. Which proves how mixed and muddled as well as unoriginal is the Mosaic version. In the fourth Hebrew creation, the heavenly bodies became the timekeepers for signs and seasons. This is not one of the six Persian creations, which six are followed by the, quote, formation of the luminaries, end quote. Of course, this is said, quote, Ahura Mazda produced illumination between the sky and the earth, the constellation stars and those not of the constellations, then the moon, and afterwards the sun, end quote. The fifth Persian creation is that of the animals. So the creation is limited to the winged fowl, sea animals, and fishes in the Hebrew account, which is considerably mixed. Mr. Gladstone asks, that is, quote, is there the smallest inconsistency in a statement which places the emerging of our land and its separation from the sea and the commencement of vegetable life before the final and full concentration of life upon the sun and its reflection on the moon and planets? And as these would be light diffused before there was light concentrated, why may not that diffused light have been sufficient for the purposes of vegetation? End quote. Certainly as there was light enough to make day before there was any sun or moon, there ought to and should have been, in my reply. I'm not concerned to reconcile the literal rendering of the Hebrew Genesis with scientific fact, but I shall have to point out on behalf of the mythical original that accordingly to the present interpretation, the heavens and earth could and did exist before the stars, or the moons and the sun. These was no time kept on earth or in heaven until night and day were divided and marked by the alternation of light and darkness, or by the twin star of evening and dawn. Therefore, the heavenly bodies were not made use of. Ergo, they did not exist in any requisite sense of the mythos. Lastly, man is the product of the sixth creation in both renderings. If taken literally. Man of the sixth Persian creation appears on the scene before the stars or moon or sun, which follow the six creations, not as mere light givers to the earth, but as timekeepers for man. And that alone will explain why the stars are said to be in existence before the moon, and the moon before the sun. In the Persian writings, the invariable order is that of stars, moon, and sun. In describing the mythical Mount Abrores, the Mount Meru of the Persian system of the heavens, is said that it grew for 200 years up to the star station, or 200 more years up to the moon station, or 200 more years up to the sun station, and for 200 more years up to the endless light. That is the mode of building up the heavens in accordance with the order of the celestial timekeepers and of the Chronian creations. Time was first told by the stars, morning and evening, by the seven which turn round once in the circle of a year, next by means of the moon and its monthly renewal, next by means of the sun, solar time being last because the most difficult to make out. In the Papyrus at Turin is said of Taht, the god of lunar time in Egypt. Quote, he had made all that the world contains and have given it light when all was darkness, and there was as yet no sun, end quote. This was figuratively and applies solely to the moon, by which time was kept earlier than it could be defined by the sun. It is well known that the lunar year and the lunar zodiac, or pathway of the moon, were earlier than the solar zodiac of 12 signs, which is too late for the mythical, quote, beginnings. In the Babylonian account of creation, the moon is produced before the sun. As George Smith points out, this is reverse order to that of the Hebrew Genesis. Evidently, he says the Babylonians considered the moon the principal body, while the book of Genesis makes the sun the greater light. Quote, Here it becomes evident, end quote, says the Bibliator, quote, that Genesis is truer to nature than the Chaldean text, end quote. The uninspired Babylonians, you see, did not know that the moon was the lesser and the sun the larger light. Professor Sayre likewise tells us that, quote, the idea which underlays the religious belief of Alkar, end quote, was that, end quote, starting quote here, the moon existed before the sun, end quote. HIB lecture LECT 165. Neither of these Assyriologists appear to have had any notion why this was so representative. The Arcadians, the Argivas, and the Quichers and other races of men claim to be pro-Sanians, of those who lived before the time of the moon, not before the existence of that luminary. Truer to nature can have no meaning for account of the creation of light prior to the existence of a heavenly body, that is, if literally taken. But neither the Egyptians, Babylonians, and Persians were talking about the cosmic creation in the modern sense, and has been ignorantly assumed and foolishly contended for, but about the mythical beginnings of the timekeepers. In these, the mapping out of the lunar month came before the solar year. Hence, the sun god was called the child of the moon god, Sin, S-I-N, in Assyria, and the lunar god, Taht, T-A-H-T, or Tehuti, is called the father of Osiris, the sun god in Egypt, the priority being dependent on the earlier observations for the keeping of time. So the Mexicans held the planet Venus to have been created before the sun. It was earlier than the moon, they said, and probably the first light that appeared in the world. That would be a star of morning and evening, which makes the first day. Hence, we are told that the first man, Onius, O-A-N-N-E-S, came up out of the Red Sea and landed in the Babylonian on the first day, end quote. The great mother to whom the planet Venus was dedicated was represented by the heifer, the pure heifer, the sacred heifer, the golden calf, as it was called. This being of either sex is supplied a twin type for Venus as Hathor or Ishtar, the double star that was male at rising and female at sunset, and therefore the twin stars of the first day. Any other earlier since these creations have besides that of timekeeping was merely elementary and related to the order in which man recognized and represented the natural elements. Darkness with its voice of thunder was the first. Out of the darkness issued the light. These two were the twins of eternal alternation in external phenomenon, found in so many forms of the mythos as the two brothers who fought each other for the birthright. The next two were moisture and air, or the water of life and the breath of life. These four creations, or as the Bundish has it, four creations of Ahura Mazda, were the four elements of darkness and light, water and air. In Egypt, they were typified by the jackal of darkness, the hawk of light, the ape of breath, and the hippopotamus, or dragon of the water. Hippopotamus, or dragon of the water, which were made those keepers of the four corners of what we call, who are universal in mythology. They include four elements of four seasons, 4 quarters of the year, or fourfold heaven, by which the circle of the whole was divided and squared as it was in the circle of Yema. I have followed out the various creations or heavens from beginning to end in the natural Genesis, end quote. As present, we must turn once more to the Persian Banahish, where it says in Revelation, which brings the formula frequently employed on matters of religion or on the periods for the observation of religious duties. Quote, the creation of the world were created by me, complete in 365 days. That in the 6 periods of the festivals which are completed in a year, end quote. Here, I don't know what that means simply. It's got ME here, so I'm just reading what it says here. Me doesn't compute here, sort of be on this part. Here then we part company with the 6 days and 1 week of creation in the Hebrew book of Genesis. We can see that it but a condensed summary of an earlier account, which may lead us to a little nearer to nature and to those phenomenal facts on which mythology was founded, the rock on which our biblical theology will be wrecked. In this version of the creation legend, the 6 creations are completed in 1 year or 365 days, or rather, the year of 365 days has been finally completed in 6 stages, or seasons, or periods in timekeeping. In accordance with that 6 creations, we learn for the Targum Palestine that Adam, as the adamant man, was created in the image of the Lord, his maker, with 365 nerves. Here, the divine model of humanity was the solar god of time, or of the creations perfected and at last in a year of 365 days, which figures are reflected in the 365 nerves. Now we can see how the Persian 6 days of celebration of each of the 6 creations become the 6 days of creation in the Hebrew Genesis. In the process of condensing mythology into cosmic and human history, and 1 year into 1 week to make it more tangible at a later time. The creations included the elements identified, together with the various systems of keeping time, which culminated at last in a year of 365 and a quarter days. These systems may be roughly sketched as, quote, 1, the 1 day of light and dark; 2, 1 turn round to a year; 3, the half year of the solstice; 4, a lunar month of the 4 quarters; 5, planetary time; 6, solar time, or a year in 365 days. When it says in the Persian Revelation that is, quote, the creatures of the world were created by me in 365 days, end quote, it does not mean during that period any more than it means the 6 days of the Hebrew misrendering of the matter. It means that the concluding creation of the 6 different creations culminated in a year of solar time, or 365 days to the year, in the image of which Adamic man was formed with 365 nerves. The origin of the Sabbath in Genesis is curiously parallel or suggested in the Bandahish. We read, quote, on matters of religion, end quote. It says in Revelations thus, quote, the creatures, or 6 creations, were created by me, completed in 365 days. That is the 6 Gahanavars, which are completed in a year, end quote. And here the matter of religion are explained as being the periods for observations of religious duties. That is, the 6 festivals or Sabbath were instituted to commemorate the 6 creations which were created complete or culminated in a year of 365 days. The Persians represent their god as resting during the 5 days after each of the 6 seasons of creation, and they also celebrate a great 6-day festival annually, beginning on the 1st of March and ending on the 6th day as the greatest holiday, because in this, the 6th season, quote, not quote, but in brackets, he places the 6th day in the Hebrew Genesis. Ahura Mazda has created the most superior things. Thus, the 6 creations is the Hebrew version, have been visibly condensed into 6 periods of time, and there is but one period for religious observation on the 7th day, and whence the Persians, or Parsees, hold their 6 festivals and periods of rest in one whole year. We have 52 Sabbats, which shows the latest rendering as well as the development of the same mythos. The Hebrew Elohim rested on the 7th day, whereas the Persian Ahura Mazda rested for 5 days at a time after each of the 6 creations. Further, these 6 seasons or periods of creation have been reduced from the earlier Babylonian version, in which the 7th day was not a Sabbath, but the period in which the animals and man were created. We're also told in the Bandahush, quote, it says in Revelations that before the coming of the destroyer, vegetation had no thorns upon it or bark about it. And afterwards, when the destroyer came, it was created with bark and things grew thornier, end quote. And in the Avesta and older scripture, this destroyer, the evil opponent, is a serpent, as it is in the book of Genesis. It's too late now to advance the claim, or assume that the Persians, the Babylonians, and the Egyptians borrowed their versions from that given by the inspired writer of the Hebrew Pentateuch. And these facts I submit furnish sufficient evidence that the book of Genesis does not contain an original revelation made by God to the Jews. In short, it does not contain any revelation at all. We're compelled to seek elsewhere before we can really understand what it does contain. The six creations, the creative acts or periods, are Persian, but the legends in Genesis have been derived from more than one source. Of late years, a mighty fuss has been made about the fact that two different systems, known as the Elohistis and the Javahisti, have been imperfect, blended, and utilized in the Hebrew version of the Genesis, but when no application of the comparative process to the various system of creation according to mythology, and with no clue whatever to the natural phenomenon in which the mythology was founded, or to the gnosis by which the myths were anciently interpreted. According to the Persian reckoning, the human creature was formed at the sixth creation, or as the Hebrew version has it, on the sixth day. Whereas in the version of the 70, man was created on the eighth day. Now, if we look closely at the first chapter of Genesis, we shall find both these reckonings combined but not blended, although these are no more than 6 days of creation mentioned in the Hebrew Genesis. There are 8 distinctive acts of creation, or others of the word. They are emulated as followers, that is. Quote, 1. The Elohim said, "Let there be light." 2. The Elohim said, "Let there be a firmament." 3. The Elohim said, "Let the waters be gathered together, and let the dry land appear." 4. The Elohim said, "Let the earth put forth grass." End quote. 5. The Elohim said, "Let there be light in the firmament." End quote. 6. The Elohim said, "Let the waters bring forth." End quote. 7. The Elohim said, "Let the earth bring forth." End quote. 8. The Elohim said, "Let us make man in our image." End quote. So the Bularish has 6 creations only. The 8 are Egyptian Gnostic, in keeping with the Ogdoad, that's Ogdoad, of primary powers, according to the Gnosis, who had preserved the only true knowledge of these mythical matters, man as the 8th creation, belongs to the mystery of Ogdoad. Irenaeus tells us how the Gnostics maintained that man was formed on the 8th day of creation. Quote, sometimes they say he was made on the 6th, and in others on the 8th day. End quote. This is in BIC. I guess this is from Irenaeus 18.2. These 2 creations of man on the 6th day and on the 8th were those of Adam, or fleshly man, and of the spiritual man, who were known to Paul and the Gnostics as the first and second Adam, the man of earth and the man from heaven. Irenaeus also says they insisted that Moses began with the Ogdoad of the 7 powers in their mother, who is called Sophia. That is the, in brackets, the old Kephah of Egypt, who is the living word at Ombos, Ombos, in brackets. Thus, we find the 2 systems are run into each other and left without the meaning of distinguishing the one from the other, or of knowing how they had either of them organized or originated. So that instead of a revelation of the beginning of the Hebrew Genesis, we have to go far beyond it to find any beginning whatever. So it is with the fall. Here, as before, the Genesis does not begin at the beginning. There was an earlier fall than that of the primal pair. In this, the number of those who failed and fell was 7. We meet with these 7 in Egypt, in brackets, 8 with the mother, in bracket, where they are called the, quote, children of Nerdens, end quote, who were were cast out from Saman, Am-Smen, end quote, the paradise of the eight, also in the Babylonian legend of creation at the seven brethren, who were seven kings, like the seven kings in the books of Revelation, and the seven non-sensical powers, who became the seven rebel angels that made war in heaven. The seven Klondike dice described as the seven watchers, who in the beginning were formed in the interior of the heaven like a vault. They extended or hollowed out that which was not visible, they raised, and that which had no exit they opened. Their work of creation being exactly identical with that of the Elohim in the book of Genesis. These are the seven elementary powers of space, who were continued at seven timekeepers. It is said of them, quote, and watching was their office, but among the stars of heaven their watch they kept out. They kept not, end quote. And their failure was to fall. In the book of Enoch, the same seven watchers in heaven are stars which transgressed the commandment of God before their time arrived, for they came not in the proper season. Therefore was he offended with them, and bound them unto the period of consummation of their crimes, at the end of the secret or great year of the world, i.e., the period of possession, when there was to be the restoration and rebeginning. The seven disposed constellations are seen by Enoch, looking like seven great blazing mountains are overthrown, the seven mountains in Revelation on which the Scarlet Lady sits. The book of Genesis tells us nothing about the nature of Elohim, erroneously rendered God, who are the creators of the Hebrew beginning, and who are themselves pre-existent and seated with the theater open and the curtains ascends. It says that in the beginning the Elohim created the heavens and the earth. In thousands of books the Elohim have been discussed, but with no application of the comparative process to this and the earlier mythologies, and therefore with no conclusive results. Our Bibleators were too conceited in their insolent ignorance to think there was anything worth knowing outside of their own books, foolishly fancying they had gotten a revelation all to themselves, a supernatural version of the cosmic Genesis. They did not care to seek for, did not dream of a natural or scientific Genesis, and could not make out the mythical. Consequently, they had never known what it was they were called upon to worship in the name of God. In his papers on the evolution of theology, Professor Huxley assumes that the Elohim of Genesis originates as the ghosts of ancestors, in doing which by no more plumbs to the bottom than does Mr. Gladstone. The Elohim are seven in number, whether as nature, powers, gods of constellations, or planetary gods, whereas the human ghosts are not, and never were, a septenary, although they may be and have been confused with these typical seven of the Pistres and patriarchs, Manus and father of earlier times. The Gnostics, however, and the Jewish Kabbalah preserve an account of the Elohim of Genesis by which we are able to identify them with other forms of these seven primordial powers. They are the children of the ancient mother called Sophia. Their names are Ithabah, Jehovah, or Io, Sabah, Adonai, Elohus, Arus, Aris, and Astanbes. Ithabah signifies the Lord God of the fathers, that is, the fathers who preceded the Father, and thus the seven are identical with the seven Pitras, or fathers in India. This is from Irenaeus, I assume B1, I'm guessing this is B1, would be book 1, 30, 5 in brackets. Moreover, the Hebrew Elohim were present by name and nature as Phoenician divinities as or powers of Santrophon, mentioned them by name and describes them as the auxiliaries of Cronus or time. In this phrase, then, the Elohim are timekeepers in heaven. In the Phoenician mythology, the Elohim are the seven sons of Sedet, identical with the seven Kabrit, who in Egypt are the seven sons of Thoth, and of the seven spirits of Ra in the Book of the Dead. In Britain, with the seven companions of Arthur in the Ark. In Polynesia, with the seven dwarf sons of Pingah. In America, with the seven Hogates, Hohgats. In India, with the seven Rishas. In Persia, with the seven Amchaspans. In Assyria, with the seven Lamazi. They had one common genesis and phenomenon, as I have traced them by number, by nature, and by name, and also one common Camite origin. They are always seven in the number and companionship or brotherhood, who call, that is, turn round together. Whence the Ari, the Egyptian Ali or Ari, gives us the root meaning, Ari, or the companions, guardians, and watchers who turn round together, hence the Elohim or Elohim. They are also the or gods in the Syrian, who were seven in number, eight with the mother in the beginning, or the manifester in the end. In their primordial phase, they were seven elementary powers, warring in chaos, lawless and timeless. They were first born of the mother in space, and then the seven companions passed into the sphere of time as auxiliaries of Cronus, or sons of the male parent. As Damascus says in his Primordial Principles, quote, the Magi considered that space and time were the source of all, and from being powers of the air, the gods were promoted to become timekeepers for man. Seven constellations were assigned to them, and so they could be called the auxiliaries of Cronus when time was established. As the seven turned round in the arc of the sphere, they were designated the seven sailors, companions, riches, or Elohim. The first seven stars, end quote, are not planetary. They are the leading stars of seven constellations, which turn round with great bear in describing the circle of a year. These Assyrians called these seven Lamazi, or leaders of the flocks of stars, designated sheep. On the Hebrew line of ascent or development, these Elohim are identified for us by the Kabbalists and Gnostics, who retain the hidden wisdom of Gnosis. The clue of which is absolutely essential to any proper understanding of mythology or theology, the creation of Elohim as auxiliaries of Cronus was not world-making at all in our sense. The myth makers were not geologists and did not pretend to be. The chaos which preceded creation was simply that of timelessness, as of the unintelligible, unintelligent, and non-sensible nature's powers. Creation proper began with the first means of measuring and recording a cycle of life. Thus, the primary creation in the Genesis, as in the Hish, is the creation of time, which the morning and evening measure one day. But the seven Cronus, as we may call them, were found to be telling time somewhat vaguely by the year, in accordance with the annual revolution of the starry sphere, and being found inexact and unfaithful to their trust. They were dispossessed and superseded, or as it was fabled, they fell from heaven. The seven were then succeeded by a polar pair and a lunar trinity or timekeepers. For example, it has been observed that there was a fixed center, which was a pivot to the starry vast, all turning round. Here, there were two constellations with seven stars in each. We call them the two bears, but the seven stars of the lesser bear were once considered to be the seven heads of the polar dragon, which we meet with at the beast with seven heads in the Akkadian hymns and in the book of Revelation. The mythical dragon originated in the crocodile, which is the dragon of Egypt. Plutarch tells us the Egyptians said the crocodile was the sole animal living in water which had his eyesight covered over with a film. So thin that he can see without himself being seen by others, quote, in which he agrees with the first god, end quote. Now, in one particular cult, the Typhonian, the first god was Sal Ek, wears the crocodile head as well as the serpent who is in the dragon, or whose constellation was the dragon. The name of Sephkev signifies the sevenfold, hence the seven heads of the dragon who is of the seven and is himself also an eight. As we are told in Revelation, in him the seven powers were unified as they were in Ik, Iao, Shinibis, and various other the chief gods who summoned up the earlier powers in the Supreme One. When unity was attained at last, for it is certain that no one God was ever made known to man by primordial revelation. The only starting point was external phenomenon, which assuredly manifested no oneness in personality. The group of Tonium brotherhood preceded the fatherhood, and finally the fatherhood succeeded the Tonium group in heaven as it was on earth. One form of this god was Satnam, and Nam, M-U-B, means the golden. Thus the reign of Sut was the age of gold afterwards assigned to Saturn by the Greeks. In Egypt, the Great Bear was a constellation of Typhon, or Kepha, K-E-P-H-A, the old Gentrix, called the mother of the revolution, and the dragon with seven heads was assigned to her son, Sevel, Cronus, or Saturn, called the dragon of life. That is, the typical dragon or serpent with seven heads was female at first, and then this type was continued as male in her son, Sevel, the sevenfold serpent, in Ik, the sevenfold, in Nam Ra, in the seven-headed serpent, Aya, Chimbus, and others. We find that these two in the book of Revelation. One is the Scarlet Lady, the mother of mystery, the great harlot, who sat on a scarlet colored beast with seven heads, which is the red dragon of the pole. She held in her hand the unclean thing of her fornication. That means the embryos of the male and female imaged by the Egyptians as the polar center, the very uterus of creation, as was indicated by the thigh constellation called Kepler of Typhon, the old dragon, in the northern birthplace of time in heaven. The two revolved about the pole of heaven, or the tree, as it was called, which was figured at the center of the starry motion. In the book of Enoch, these two constellations are identified as the Leviathan and Behemoth equals Behemoth, or the dragon, and hippopotamus equals great bear, and they are primal pair that was first created in the Garden of Eden. So that the Egyptian first mother, Kepa, whose name signifies mystery, was the original Hebrew Chaval, or what we call our Eve. And therefore Adam is one with Sebel, the sevenfold one, the solar dragon, in whom the powers of light and darkness were. Combined in sevenfold nature was shown in seven rays worn by the Gnostic Leo Chimus, god of the number seven, who is Sabat by name and form, and the first father is head of the seven. Another bit of evidence here may be adduced from the Rabbinic legends relating to Adam's first wife. Her name was Lilith, Lilith, which equals Rerit, Rerit, is that Egyptian goddess whose constellation was the Great Bear. Thus, Adam and Eve are identified at last with the greater and lesser bears, and the mythical tree of knowledge with the celestial northern pole. The Hebrew Adam can be likewise shown to have been a form of the chief one of the earlier seven who fell from heaven. Not only is he the head of the first group of patriarchs turned into historical characters in Genesis, who are seven in number, preceding the 10, but also learned that in the mysteries of Samad, the race, the name of Adam was given to the first and chief one of the seven, Caban, who were a form of earliest seven-time keepers that failed and fell from heaven. Moreover, the Gnostics identify these primary seven by nature and by the name of the seven mundane demons, demons who always oppose and resist the human race, because it was on their account that the father among the seven was cast down to a lower world, not to the earth. One name of their father is Ithabog. Adam is another name of the same mythical personage, and Adam of Sumrathas race was chief of the seven. Adam is the father among the seven. It's identified with the Egyptian Atom, which was the father god in his first sovereignty, and whose other name of Atom is identical with the Hebrew Adoniah. In this way, the second creation in Genesis reflects and continues the later creation in this mythos, which explains it. The fall of Adam is the lower world led to his being humanized on earth, by which process the celestial was turned into the mortal, and this, which belongs to the astronomical allegory, got literalized at the fall of man, or descent of the soul into matter, and the conversion of the angelical into an earthly being. The Roman Church has always held that mankind was created in consequences of the fall of the rebel angels who raised a revolt in heaven, was simply a survival of the mythos, as it is found in the text when Ea, the first father, is said to, quote, grant forgiveness to the conspiring gods, end quote, for whose, quote, redemption did he create mankind. It's from Sarah, again, SAYCEHIB, lecture 140. The subject matter is celestial solely, and solely celestial because it was astronomical. The fall was not to the earth, nor on the earth, but to a lower heaven called the Adamah in Genesis. Nor did Adam and Eve become human realities below, because they were outcast gods of constellations that were superseded above. The matter is mythical, and I am trying to show, as the result of wide research, what is the meaning of that which we call mythical. By tracing the physical origins of the ancient gods, the Hebrew included to natural phenomena in accordance with data and determination still extant. As nothing was known concerning the genesis and nature of Elohim, it has always been a moot question as to whom the speakers addressed the speech. Quote, let us make man in our image, end quote. It has commonly been assumed that the us denoted a plural of dignity like, quote, the we, royalty and editorship. But it is not so. The Elohim are the Egyptian, Akkadian, Hebrew, and Phoenician form of the universal seven powers, who are seven in Egypt, seven in Akkad, Babylon, Persia, India, Britain, and seven among the Gnostics and Kabbalists. They were the seven fathers who preceded the Father in heaven, because they were earliest than the individualized fatherhood on earth. Mythology reflects the primitive sociology as in a mirror, and we could not comprehend the reflection in the divine dynasties above until we knew something fundamentally above the human relationship on the earth beneath. The field of Babylonian mythology is one very vast battleground between the early motherhood and the latter fatherhood, that is, the mother in space in the stellar and lunar characters, opposed to the latter and solar fatherhood, which became more especially Semite, indeed, where the Akkadians wrote the, quote, female and the male. The Semite translated preprincely reserved it and rendered it by the, quote, male and the female, end quote. This setting up of the supreme God as solely male to the exclusion of the female has often been erroneous attributed to a supposed monotheistic instinct, end quote, originating with the Semites. In Egypt, the solar fatherhood has been attained in the sovereignty of Atum Ra when the records began, but the same battle went on all through the monumental history, more fiercely when the heretics, the Motherites, the Blackheads, were now and again reinforced by allies from without. When the Elohim said, quote, let us make man in our image after our likeness, end quote, there were seven of them who represented the seven elements, powers or souls that went to the making of the human being, who came into existence before the Creator was represented, anthropomorphical, or could have conferred the human likeness on the animate man. It was in the sevenfold image of the Elohim that man was first created, with his seven elements, principles, or souls, and therefore could not have been formed in the image of the one God. The seven Gnostic Elohim tries to make a man in their own image, but could not, from lack of viral power, V-I-R-I-L-E, power. Thus, their creation in earth and heaven was a failure. The Gnostics identified these seven as the Hebrew Elohim, who exhorted each other, saying, quote, let us make man after our image and likeness, end quote. They did so, but the man whom they made was a failure, because they themselves were lacking in the soul of the fatherhood. When the Gnostics, chief of the seven, cried, quote, I am the Father and the God, end quote. His mother, Sophia, replied, "Do not tell us lies, Ithaba. The first man, Anthropos, son of Andropos, is above thee," end quote. That is, man who had now been created in the image of the fatherhood was superior to the gods who were derived from the mother parent alone. For as it had been at first on earth, so was it afterwards in heaven, and that the primary gods were held to be soulless, like the earliest races of men, because they had not attained the soul of the individualized fatherhood. The Gnostics taught that the spirits of wickedness, the inferior seven, derived their origin from the great mother alone, who produced without fatherhood. It was in the image, then in the sevenfold Elohim, that the seven races were formed, which we sometimes hear of as a pre-Adamite race of men, because they were earlier than the fatherhood, which was individualized only in the second Hebrew creation. These were the primitive people of the past, the old, despised, dark races of the world, who were held to have been created without souls because they were born before the fatherhood was individualized on earth or in heaven, for there could be no God the Father recognized until the human father had been identified. Nothing more than the general ancestry soul of the fathers or the soul of the seven elementary forces. These early races were first represented by Ptolemaic zootypes and were afterwards abominated as the dog men or monkey men, men with tails, mere preliminary people, created in the likeness of animals, reptiles, fish, or birds, warriors with the body of a bird of the valley, and men with the faces of ravens, were sucked by the old dragon Tiamat, and their type may be seen in the image of the twin Sut Horus, who has the head of a bird of light in front and the neb or black vulture of darkness behind. Thoth and his seven Krenebmut are the pygmies. As the black race was first on earth, so it is in the mirror of mythology. These are the quote people of the black heads, end quote, who are referred to on the tablets and classed with reptiles during a lunar eclipse. These typical blackheads were the primitive powers of darkness to which the old black aborigines in various lands were likened or assimilated by their despisers. In the Babylonian prayers, we find that the many-named mother goddess is invoked as the quote, the mother who has begotten the blackheads, end quote. These at times were intentionally confused and confounded with their elementary prototypes. 7 such races are described in the Bunahish, or aboriginal creation, as the earthmen, the men of the water, the breast carry, the breast eye, and the one-legged, the batman, or the batmen, I should say, and the men with tails. These were soulless people. They are also referred to by Esdras as the other people who are nothing, quote, but be like unto spittle, spittle, end quote. That is, when compared with those who descended from the Father as Adam or Atom on earth, and who worship a Father as Atom or Jehovah in heaven. There were 7 creations altogether, 7 heavens, which were planetary in their final phase, 7 creators and 7 races of men. And when the one God had been evolved, he was placed at the head of the 7. Hence, Phla in Egypt was called the father of the fathers, who in India are known as the 7 Pitras. So Ahura Mazda, Ithavad, or Jehovah was placed first in the later creation. The chief of the 7 Ali equals Elohim. As supreme one of the group becomes the Semonite Ai or Ei, designated the highest God, who was the 7th as Saturn, so that El and Jehovah, Elohim, are identical in their pronominal origin, while El Shaddai is the same son of the old sucker who was Typhon in Egypt and Tiamat in Assyria. When in the second creation and in the second chapter of Genesis, Jehovah Elohim forms man from the dust of the ground and woman from the bone of man. Jehovah is that one God who sums up in himself the seven previous powers precisely as they were totally in Atom Ra, seventh Ra, Agni, or Ahura Mazda. He has been identified for us by the same name as one of the seven Gnostic Elohim, their IAO or Jehovah. This God appears by the name in the second chapter of the book of Genesis, and yet in verse 26 of chapter 4, it is stated that, quote, then began men to call upon the name of Jehovah, end quote. And again, the same God apparently is announced by the name in Exodus chapter 6, verses 3, where he affirms that he has not been known previously by the name of Jah or Jehovah. But the difference between Jehovah and Elohim and Jah or IAO is a fact which can only be determined by a knowledge of the phenomenon. The Jewish Kabbalah and Gnosticism have never yet been grappled with or discussed in relation to mythology and the rootage in nature. The subject has only been nibbled at in little grazing with a go as you please modern interpretation of doctrines concerning spirit and matter. The sevenfold one God is the name and origin, whether known by the name of Jehovah, Iosabat, Sebaot, the sevenfold, Ea, the fish with seven fins, Ra with seven souls, Agni with seven arms, the Gnostic Chubnibus or Heptatalis with seven rays, El of the seventh planet, or the dragon with seven heads. But there is another, Jah or Iao, who is the lunar divinity and who was that draw of the mother and child, which becomes a triad as the child grows into a consort for the same mother. It is more ancient than the divine fatherhood and preceded the lunar and solar trinity of father, mother, and son. This was the moon god who rode on the heavens by the name of Jah, and in the phase the zoo types were superseded by the human likeness, and the god was imaged as one in threefold human characters when time was reckoned by the mother moon, child moon, and the viral new moon. The human family exalted to heaven as the divine father, mother, and child followed the recognition of the personal fatherhood and sociology, that is, and the knowledge that the lunar light was derived from the sun, just as the institution superseded the mother and the brotherhood of the totem stage on earth, so was it in heaven. In each phase, the human sociology is reflected in the mirror of mythology. One Jewish sign of this trinity given by Bochart, Bochart, heart, is a circle containing three yacht letters. Yeah, I remember seeing that. Yeah. The numerical value of which is 30, or 10 days to each of these three phases of the moon. Another of the lunar types is the ass, ASS, the three-legged ass of the Bunahish. In the Egyptian hieroglyphics, the head of the ass is assigned for number 30 on the same ground. And on account of such typology, the Jews were charged with being worshippers of the ass. Thus, the Elohims were the seven powers, elemental, pre-planetary as planetary. Jehovah Elohim was the sevenfold one as supreme among the planetary gods, and Jah is the threefold lunar deity. The Trinity and unity in the likeness of the human family. These were again combined in a totality that is tenfold in the divine fatherhood. Hence, the Hebrew letter Yod, Y-O-D, the sign of 10, is a symbol of the ineffable name of IEO, Yod, or Jehovah. Thus, the name of IEO can be expressed in Roman numerals by the 1 and the 0, which figure the number 10. And this figure of the tenfold totality, soulmate is both the heavenly man called Adam Katman by the Kabbalists, composed of what they term the 10 Sephirah, and the supreme being worshipped by the whole of Christendom today as the one God, supposed to have been made known by divine revelation to a monotheist race of men. The Egyptian Atum, A-T-E-N, will show us how and why the Jews could use the name of Atum, A-D-O-N, as a equivalent for that of Yah or Yot, which has the numerical value of 10. Aten as a title of highness is determined by the numerical sign of 10 and therefore is a equivalent for I and O or IAO of the tenfold nature, unified at last in Atom, ATEN, or Atom, ADON, as the Lord who was God of the 10 tribes. Such, to put briefly what I have elaborated elsewhere, was the origin a natural phenomenon, and such was the unity of at last attained in a tenfold totality by the Supreme One, the All, the Trinity unity not being initiated but fond, e pluribus union. Mr. Gladstone last the most pathetic plea, pitiful as a flag of distress, fluttering at the much what called masthead of doom vessel visible going down, is that the tale in Genesis is beautifully, if not true. He says, if we view it as a popular narrative, it is singularly vivid, forcible, and effective. If we take it as a poem, it is indeed sublime. End quote. But the question is it false or true? Have we been deluded, misled, and cheated? The essence of poetry even must be truth and not falsehood, however attractive, must not mislead us on the pretext of being a revelation. The older I grows, the faster I am losing my faith in all lovely unrealities. Consider the effects of such false teaching. Only the other day, a child who has been taught that God made man out of the dust of the earth was watching an editing cloud of dust being swirled into shape by the wind when she cried, "Oh, mother, come here. Look, I think God is creating another baby." End quote. Our mental standpoint has been made quite as childish with regard to other beginnings, and from every pulpit of the past we have been employed to remain as little children at the mother's knee. We have been taught and compelled to surrender our reason, doff our manhood, and grovel like worms in the earth as the successful mode of wriggling our way through the worst world in heaven. We have been robbed by a thief in the night. Children have been cheated out of their natural senses, and the mental emancipation of men has taken the place of the physical once indicated by the Christ, in brackets MATH, XIX, 12. Men who are sane or most other subjects will give up all common sense on this and talk like intellectual lunatics. See how the teachers of the people who ought to have learned better for themselves continue all their life to wear the cast-off vestments of ancient mythology. Take Mr. Ruskin as another typical example. He is in many ways a most diligent searcher after truth and a worship of all things noble and beautiful, but he was so profoundly infected by the falsehood made religious to him in childhood as to be marred by it and mentally maimed for life. In his Modern Painters, end quote, he tells us that, quote, man perishes in seeking knowledge, end quote, and, quote, there is not any part of our nature, nor can there be through eternity uninfluenced or unaffected by the fall, end quote. Another quote, this most painful to see such a man so human at heart, such a seer and lover of all loveliness, believing so damnable a lie, and endorsing it not only for his own lifetime, but for so long as his writings may last, because it was told to him in his own fine childhood. It is good to waken the eyes of men to the beautiful, but still better to lead them in the enduring truth. So soon as my own eyes were opened wide enough to take in the immense imposture that has been based upon mythology, I gave up my chance of a seat upon the Mount of the Muse, M-U-S-E-S, and turned aside from the prophet crown of poetry as a seeker after verifiable certitude. And after all, how can the picture of a divine lies fool at the head of affairs with so certain a breakdown in the beginning? He beautifully went such a representative reduces the drama of the whole universe into a most pitiful one act force. Any God who demands the worship of fear would be unworthy the service of love. Correct. Our modern atheism is mainly the result of this false theism being torn up, by the root to expose its godlessness falsehood is almost fraudulent, no matter how it may be poetized or painted, no matter how religiously we have believed it true, or how long we may have been imposed on by its fairness. And woe to the revelation that is proved to be false. Woe to the Sphinx when her secret is at last found out. It will then be her turn to be torn. The Hebrew Pentateuch has not only retarded the growth of science in Europe for 18 centuries, but the ignorant believers in it as a book of Revelation have tried to strangle every science at its birth. There could be and was but little of no progress in astronomy, geology, biology, or sociology until his teachings were rejected by the more enlightened among men, the free thinkers and the demonstrators of the fact. The progress has been in proportion to the reputation. And for myself, the nearer I draw them towards death, the more earnestly, nay, vengefully, do I resent the false teachings that have embittered my life, not for myself only, but more for others, and most of all for the children. Remember the education of English children today is chiefly in the hands of Orthodox teachers who still give the Bible all the preference over nature and science, and who will go on deluding the innocent little ones as long as ever they are paid or permitted to do so. But what a dastardly shame it is for us to allow the children to be taught that which we know to be false, or do not ourselves believe to be true. The present calls upon you with a appealing voice to protect the unborn future against these terrible tyranny of the past. Do not any longer let the whining sheet of death be the swallowing bands put on the helpless little ones for life at their intellectual birth. It is appalling to think of the populations that, after already passed on victimized, the lives that have been wrecked, the brains that have been bruised, and the hearts broken of those who have dashed themselves against these barriers to human progress and the freedom of thought, which was ignorantly erected and then made sacred in the name of God, by means this Hebrew book of the beginnings. In short, by literalization of mythology. That should inspire one effort more, mightier than any made before. The barrier dash wall at last shall fall. The future must be free for all. That is the end of the chapter here. And so there is a staying here also as reply here, but I'm pretty beat, so we're not going to do that tonight. Um, uh, so we'll probably deal with this later. Yeah, it's going to be a proprietor, Professor A.H. Sayre, S-A-Y-R-E. Yeah, this is roughly almost 2 hours long, not quite. And so anyway, I just wanted to share this again by this work by, got his name all of a sudden, Gerald Massey. So thank you for being here and attending. And I hope that you have ears to hear, and eyes to see what he's talking about here. Because what's happened, simply as he said, we've been, as children, I talked to Phil yesterday how the church had made me feel guilty about so many things in the past. And how others who have corrupted hearts, you see. And this is true. It stuns the growth of most people, folks. So anyway, just wanted to share this with you tonight. So again, this is valuable. This information. It may not be for now, but maybe for the future that someone else will look into this, because we've been lied to enough, folks. Enough of it, and we've been deceived. And we seem to think that we don't seem to think it as a serious thing. And so, but anyway, I'm going to say goodnight and wish you well. You have a good, you take care, and we'll talk to you soon.